Hello, and welcome. Today, we're going to perform a case analysis of a recent Supreme Court resolution. The case is Veronica L. Tumampos and Department of Environment and Natural Resources Region 7 versus Concepcion P. Ang, decided on June 16, 2021. By the end of this video, you will be able to: first, identify the key facts and background of a legal dispute. Second, formulate the central legal issues. Third, apply the relevant Supreme Court rules and legal principles. And fourth, understand the ratio decidendi, or the reason for the decision. Let's begin by establishing the facts of the case. The subject of this dispute is a parcel of land in Babag, Lapu-Lapu City, Cebu, with an area of 19,156 square meters. This is the subject property. There are two main parties claiming ownership of this land. First, we have Veronica L. Tumampos, the petitioner. She claims to have acquired the property in 2013 from the heirs of Teodoro Bordon, who was the previous tax declarant and survey claimant. Tumampos states she declared the property for taxation, took possession, and introduced improvements. Second, we have Concepcion P. Ang, the respondent. Her claim traces back to 1947, when the property was registered for taxation under Julio Bordon. It was then bought by Tomasa Pongasi in 1978, then by Bonifacio Domasmog, and finally, Ang acquired it from Domasmog's heirs in 1994. Now let's look at the legal actions taken by each party. In 1995, Ang filed an application for judicial titling of the property with the Regional Trial Court, or RTC. This case is still pending. Meanwhile, in 2012, Tumampos filed a free patent application for the same property with the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, or DENR. When Ang learned of Tumampos' application, she filed a formal protest with the DENR, arguing that the DENR had no jurisdiction. Tumampos' documents were void, and she had a better right to the land. Let's follow the case through the different levels of the Philippine legal system. First, the DENR 7 ruled on Tumampos' free patent application. In its 2014 decision, the DENR gave due course to Tumampos' application and dismissed Ang's protest. The DENR's reasoning was based on two main points. First, it declared the land public land, citing a certification from the Land Registration Authority. Therefore, it concluded that the DENR, not the regular courts, had jurisdiction over its administration and disposition. It also invoked the doctrine of primary jurisdiction, stating that an administrative body like the DENR is better equipped to handle such claims. Second, the DENR found Tumampos' claim more credible. It noted discrepancies in Ang's tax declarations and found no proof of how Ang's predecessor, Julio, acquired the land. In contrast, it found that Tumampos had immediately taken possession and introduced improvements, and had tacked her possession to that of her predecessor. Ang filed a motion for reconsideration, which was denied. Instead of appealing to the DENR secretary, Ang filed a petition for certiorari with the Court of Appeals. This brings us to the Court of Appeals ruling. The CA granted the petition, reversing the DENR's decision. Its reasoning was as follows. First, it noted that Ang had a pending judicial titling case filed before Tumampos' free patent application. The CA believed it would be unjust to disregard this, as the DENR's decision could conflict with the RTC's eventual ruling. Second, the CA held that since both the DENR and regular courts can issue titles, the DENR should have deferred to the pending judicial case. It concluded that the DENR acted without jurisdiction in taking cognizance of Tumampos' application. Tumampos' motion for reconsideration was denied by the CA, leading her to file the current petition for review on certiorari with the Supreme Court. Now that we have the facts, Let's identify the core legal issues that the Supreme Court needed to resolve. The first issue is whether the Court of Appeals gravely erred in giving due course to Eng's petition for certiorari. This issue is crucial because it questions the very procedure Eng used to challenge the DENR's decision. The Supreme Court will need to determine if a certiorari petition was the correct legal remedy. The second issue is whether the rule on appeal from the DENR's decision may be dispensed with, and instead, a petition for certiorari be filed in its place. This second issue is closely related to the first. It asks whether there are circumstances that would allow a party to bypass the normal appeal process and go straight to a certiorari petition. The Supreme Court will examine the exceptions to the general rule that certiorari is not a substitute for a lost appeal. To resolve these issues, the Supreme Court relied on several key legal rules and principles. First, the Court cited Section 1, Rule 65 of the Rules of Court, which defines a petition for certiorari. This rule states that a writ of certiorari can be issued when a tribunal, board, or officer exercising judicial or quasi-judicial functions has acted without or in excess of jurisdiction, or with grave abuse of discretion amounting to lack or excess of jurisdiction. Crucially, the rule also requires that there be no appeal or any other plain, speedy, and adequate remedy in the ordinary course of law. The Court emphasized that certiorari is an extraordinary recourse, limited in scope to errors of jurisdiction. It does not concern errors of judgment, which can only be reviewed through an appeal. An error of jurisdiction means the tribunal acted without or beyond its authority, or with grave abuse of discretion, which is a capricious and whimsical exercise of judgment. An error of judgment, on the other hand, is a mistake in the application of law, or in the appreciation of facts. Second, the Court applied the principle of exhaustion of administrative remedies. This principle requires that a party must first complete all available administrative remedies before resorting to the courts. In this case, the DENR Department Administrative Order No. 87, Series of 1990, provides for an appeal from the decisions of DENR regional offices to the DENR Secretary within 15 days. The Court also discussed the two modes of disposing public land through confirmation of incomplete or imperfect titles. The first is judicial confirmation, which is under the jurisdiction of regular courts. The second is administrative legalization, or the grant of free patents, which is under the exclusive jurisdiction of the DENR. The Court clarified that the DENR has exclusive jurisdiction over the management and disposition of public lands, and the authority to resolve conflicting claims over them, unless the land has already been removed from the public domain and acquired a private character. Now, let's analyze the Supreme Court's reasoning, or the ratio decidendi, for its decision. The Court found the petition meritorious and reversed the Court of Appeals' decision. The Court's reasoning can be broken down into two main points. First, the Court ruled that Eng's petition for certiorari was an improper recourse because she had an available and adequate remedy, an appeal to the DENR Secretary. The Court emphasized that certiorari is not a substitute for a lost appeal. Eng failed to prove that an appeal to the DENR Secretary would not promptly and fully resolve her objections. By failing to timely file her appeal, the DENR's decision had already attained finality. The Court acknowledged that there are exceptions to the rule that certiorari cannot be filed if an appeal is available, especially if the appeal is inadequate or slow. However, Eng failed to prove that her case fell under any of these exceptions. Second, the Court disagreed with the CA's view that the DENR had no jurisdiction over Tumampos' free patent application due to Eng's pending judicial titling case. The Court reiterated that judicial confirmation and administrative legalization are distinct modes of disposing public land. The DENR has exclusive jurisdiction over the management and disposition of public lands and the authority to resolve conflicting claims over them. The DENR had stressed that the disputed property was declared public land and remained part of the public domain. Therefore, the DENR properly took cognizance of the subject property's administration and disposition. In sum, the Court found no indication that the DENR 7 acted with grave abuse of discretion. The DENR did not act arbitrarily or with prejudice when it granted Tumampos' application. Therefore, the grant of the petition for certiorari by the CA lacks sufficient legal justification. Let's conclude by summarizing the Supreme Court's final ruling. The Supreme Court granted the petition filed by Tumampos, and the DENR. It reversed and set aside the decision and resolution of the Court of Appeals. Consequently, the decision and order of the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, Region 7, are reinstated. This means that the DENR's original decision, which granted Tumampos free patent application and dismissed Ang's protest, is now the controlling legal outcome. In this analysis, we have successfully identified the facts, issues, rules, and reasoning of the Supreme Court's resolution. We've seen how the court applied the principles of certiorari and exhaustion of administrative remedies to determine the proper jurisdiction and procedure for land disputes involving public lands. Thank you for watching.